Deep into History is independent and proudly listener-supported. To support the show, please go to patreon.com/deepintohistory. I could really use your help. And for everyone who has ever supported my art, I salute you and thank you from the center of my being. This is Deep into History, and I'm your host, Arjun Hundal.
Some history shows merely scratch the surface.
It's one small step for man.
We go a little deeper.
I regard myself as a soldier, though a soldier of peace.
This is Deep into History. How deep do you want to go?
It is late summer in the year 102 before the Common Era, in the now fully Roman-controlled province of Gallia Narbonensis. A mere 2 days after the legions of Consul Gaius Marius had wiped out the titanic horde of Teutones and Ambrones, led by their high king Toitabad, at what came to be known as the Battle of Aquae Sextiae. Just before the crack of dawn, the consul is shook awake by a page and handed a sealed letter from the Senate. Bleary-eyed, he broke the wax seal and was in a momentary state of utter disbelief as he finished reading the shocking news and request for immediate aid to save the city of Rome itself. For the Senate's letter, though vague and with very few details, stated that Rome's other consular army, which was tasked with holding the Alpine passes in the defense of the north of Italy against the Cimbri, had failed, which implied that in effect, the barbarians were now in control of the province of Cisalpine Gaul and had successfully invaded the Italian mainland, meaning that if they chose to march south immediately, their horde could be at the walls of Rome itself in a mere week. This was an emergency. His army was desperately needed to block any advance, and his exhausted legions were required to engage and destroy the invincible Cimbri and their allies, or the Republic would surely fall. The consul shot up from his bed, ordered his page to bring him his armor, and sent another to call for his officers to attend him immediately in his command tent, and yet another to order his personal signaler to sound the horn, which would initiate a full battle muster of his entire consular army and would cause his men to arm themselves for battle, gather their supplies, assemble into their cohorts, and be prepared to march once their officers returned to them. In mere seconds, the trumpet sounded. And quickly after, trumpets were blaring from signalers stationed around his massive camp, atop the hill, whose steep decline down to the river and the vast plain beyond was covered with the bodies of Teutones, Ambrones, and Teugeni tribesmen, who his legions had vanquished in a wholesale slaughter. As he armed himself, his officers burst into his command tent and stood at attention around Marius's command table, where his pages had already placed maps of Trans and Cisalpine Gaul. As he entered and took his position at the head of the table, he studied the maps intently and used what little information the Senate had provided in the letter to make an educated guess as to where the Cimbri were and where best to position his legions to block the horde's path to the Eternal City. As he considered everything, he realized there were other matters and a major concern to be addressed. That concern being that though they had killed or enslaved the vast majority of the Teutone horde, some 2,000 had escaped. Among them, many lesser kings and high chieftains who, left to their own devices, could potentially rile up local Celtic tribes into open rebellion once his legions had left the province. So first, he ordered the commander of his elite auxiliary Numidian cavalry to track and hunt them down, with orders to kill all commoners, but if possible, capture their nobles. The commander saluted, turned, and ran out of the tent to his men and horses to begin the hunt. Next, Marius pointed to a spot on the map in western Cisalpine Gaul, the north of Italy, and ordered his army to move there at maximum speed. His men were to leave immediately with only vital equipment and enough food to sustain themselves for 2 weeks. He would arrange for fresh supplies to meet them at their destination. The massive treasure that his men had taken as their spoils of war would be assembled onto a relatively few carts pulled by their pack animals into a column under the protection of a cohort of his personal honor guard, while it slowly made its way south to the allied city of Marsilia, modern Marseille, with a letter he had already dictated to his scribe, ordering the city's elders to house, guard, and keep the treasure safe until he called for its release. He explained that without any carts or pack animals, carrying only vital supplies on their poles would allow his legions to march at record speed and be in position as soon as possible. His final order was that their camp was to be burned to the ground as soon as they left, thus leaving no material or the camp itself to be studied by potential enemies to copy and use against Rome. He gave a solemn nod to his officers, and they left to carry out his commands. Ready for battle or whatever awaited him, the consul followed them out of his command tent and found the remainder of his honor guard, now 4,500 heavy cavalry, his killers, had already assembled into a column awaiting him. He mounted his massive white stallion at their head, and with a nod, the nearest gate of the camp was pushed open, and they galloped forth to save the Republic from the Cimbric horde. His honor guard devoured many miles before they reached a river surrounded by grass ideal for grazing. Marius made a fist and raised his right arm, which signaled a halt. As his men and horses ate, drank, and took a few moments to refresh themselves, he looked back in the direction from which they had come and saw that a small but growing black plume of smoke was rising in the distance, which meant that his orders had been carried out exactly as he knew they would. During the ride, he had time to consider the many implications of the vague letter from the Senate, also to contemplate any and all strategies he could use to stop the Cimbri. And as he stood there, watching the smoke plume become a column rising to fill and darken the horizon, the Achilles of the late Republic had a dark thought. If the legions under the command of Rome's junior consul had indeed been wiped out, as all Roman armies who had faced the barbarians had been for more than a decade until his, it stood to reason that his rival, Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who had resigned the high rank of legate he had given him, only to return to Rome and run for and become a military tribune in the army of Consul Catulus, had perished as well. And though he mourned the loss of so many Roman warriors in this, the Republic's most desperate hour, he realized that without his handsome, cunning, and charismatic rival, nothing and no one could prevent him from fulfilling the prophecy he had received as a child, meaning that he was indeed Jupiter's chosen, the instrument of the king of Olympus's will, and he would become consul of Rome 7 times. Gaius Marius ordered his men to remount and ride forth to Rome, and despite the growing blackness caused by the smoke dimming the sun, the consul's eyes gleamed as if infused by bolts of Jupiter's lightning, and he grinned. This is a tale of desperation, the tale of a desperate people who had wandered across Europe in an epic quest to find a new homeland. The tale of a desperate republic drained of manpower, desperately trying to defend its heartland against a foe that had vanquished all armies it had sent against it with such ease that it seemed to its citizens that they had angered the gods and lay under a curse. The tale of an inexperienced junior consul leading Rome's new improved legions against a mighty king who led an army of elite ironclad giant warriors. The saga of Nicopolis' Felix, using all his skills to ensure victory so that he could attain enough power to face his nemesis, who considered himself to be Jupiter's chosen. Rome versus the Cimbri, Rome versus the Tigrini, Rome versus the ferocious Celtic tribes of the Italian Alps, and the opening salvo in a blood feud that would bring the Republic to its knees, dooming it to fall to the Empire. So take a deep breath, let it out slowly. Put some smoke in the air if you choose, and just let your mind flow to my voice as we go deep into the late 2nd century before the Common Era, as we move through the north of Italy with the so seductive Lucius Cornelius Sulla. and experience the titanic Battle of Tridentum in a tale I call Versus the Cimbrian War. Welcome back. Thank you for listening to this preview of our next tale. The full version will be available next week on Patreon and Spotify Plus. So go to patreon.com/deepintohistory and pledge your support. You'll also gain access to an ever-growing library of Patreon-exclusive tales, early releases, stickers, giveaways, and of course, get to chat with yours truly.
That's patreon.com/deepintohistory.
You can follow the show at Deep Into History on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, and Blue Sky. And as always, my dear friend, take care of yourself. I truly look forward to the next time we go deep, deep, deep.